So this quick little video is going to be an analysis of My Life Had Stood a Loaded Gun by the impeccable, the incomparable Emily Dickinson. I am a huge Dickinson fan. She is an incredibly challenging poet. She is an incredibly unique poet. And I've kind of always argued that Dickinson changed poetry. She was writing in the mid-1800s, writing really for herself. Her poetry was not well received when she was writing during her lifetime, in part because it was so cerebral and frankly considered bizarre by the other poets of her time, because Emily never comes out and says what she means. Emily loves to hide meaning behind layers of language and metaphor and simile. And people really struggled with this in her lifetime. So she wrote roughly 1,800 different poems, but only about a dozen were ever published during her life. It was only after her death that her sister found this trunk full of poetry journals. And her sister then started publishing her work, and it took a little bit of time, but the literary world started to see Emily's talent and her skill at writing incredibly complex, thoughtful poetry that challenged people, but also helped people see the world around them in a different, more complex way. So this is why I love Emily, right? I'm an Emily fan. But like I always tell my students, when you read an Emily poem and you read it and you get it right away, go back, look at it again. Because if you understand what Emily is saying immediately, you don't understand what she's saying at all, right? She's never going to be that straightforward, that obvious in her meaning. So what we're going to be doing here today is walking through this poem, My Life Had Stood a Loaded Gun. It's poem number 764. Emily didn't title her poetry, she numbered them. So when we refer to her work, we often refer to it as either the number or by its first line. And we're going to walk through this poem using our TP-CAST system. So remember, TP-CAST stands for title, paraphrase. I am left-handed, so I cover up as I write. Connotation, attitude, which is another word for tone. Put that to the side. We're going to look for shifts. We're going to go back to our title again, see if we have a deeper meaning or maybe a more complex understanding of it. And then we're going to think about themes presented in the poem. I really like this structure because I think it will provide you with multiple avenues of exploration. It'll give you different things to think about as you write your own explication for essay number 2. So we're going to read the poem first, and then I have a whole page of notes that I've written that I'm going to put down for you, and immediately you're going to go, oh my God, and then we're going to work through them, so please don't panic. Let's start by looking at the title. My Life Had Stood a Loaded Gun. Now, immediately, we're going to probably respond to that idea of a loaded gun. And we think about what a loaded gun means. This is something with the potential for harm, something dangerous, so she's saying that her life is full of potential. Potential for harm, potential for danger, potential for what, right? So we have this comparison, this metaphor of her life being a loaded gun. Let's read through it and see if we can come to a paraphrase. My life had stood a loaded gun in corners till a day. The owner passed, identified, and carried me away. And now we roam the sovereign wood, and now we hunt the doe. And every time I speak for him, the mountains straight reply. And I do smile, such cordial light upon the valley glow. It is as if a Vesuvian face had let its pleasure through. And when at night, our good day done, I guard my master's head, 'tis better than the eider duck's deep pillow to have shared. To foe of his I'm deadly foe, none stir the second time, on whom I lay a yellow eye or an emphatic thumb. Though I than he must longer live, he longer must than I, for I have but the power to kill without the power to die. Immediately, I think you'll notice a few things about Emily's writing. I like to refer to her by her first name because I like to think that we will be friends someday, or maybe we are friends in a past life. You're going to notice that she uses some odd capitalization, right? So look at her words that she sees that she has capitalized: life, loaded gun, corners, owner, me, we, sovereign wood, doe. She does this throughout her poetic career, where she would capitalize words that for her, as the poet, were words of importance. These are little clues to us as a reader to pay attention to these words. These are words that will help us get to an understanding of the poem. You'll also know that Emily uses quite a few hyphens, right? I mean, they are throughout the poem, these dashes. This is part of what kept her from being highly published in her lifetime, is because these dashes are not grammatically correct. And there was a big emphasis on grammatical correctness during the mid-1800s. Poetic license wasn't really a thing at the time. So when editors saw her work and they saw these hyphens, they just disregarded her work entirely, thinking she didn't know how to write or she didn't know how to use a hyphen. That's not it at all. Emily knows how to use a hyphen. She's using these purposefully. These dashes, these hyphens, are meant to be pauses in thought. Okay, these are meant to convey her communication, her process of thinking to us. So instead of just saying, my life has stood a loaded gun in corners till a day, we're meant to have these kind of elliptical mental breaks. My life had stood a loaded gun in corners till a day. The owner passed, identified, and carried me away. These are signposts to us on how to read the poem, where to pause, where to think, where to look for complexity. So get ready for my crazy notes, okay? Please don't panic. There's a lot to say here and I'll forget otherwise. See, I'm going to post this also, the notes themselves, on D2L because they're colorful, but when I printed them today, they printed in black and white and gray. So let's kind of walk through the poem a bit, shall we? Let me zoom in a wee bit. Please don't panic, right? So let's do a quick paraphrase. I'm going to flip this over so it's not as challenging. She's talking about her life being a loaded gun until one day an owner comes by, picks her up, and takes her away. Then we go from my to we. So we have this idea of moving into a partnership. And they travel together and they do things together. She talks here, she goes back to the I, that singular, and she talks about how she sees this owner, how she responds to this owner. She talks about how she guards this owner, that their comfort is better than a pillow. She talks about being foe to anybody who dares come at her master, come at her owner, that she is dangerous to them. And then she ends the poem with this riddle, right? Though I than he must longer live, he longer must than I, for I have the power to kill without the power to die. And Emily is trying to get us to take this leap with her as to what she's talking about, who the I is and who the owner is. And in this poem, this is a little bit odd, but the speaker is a pen, okay, a writing utensil, a pen, and the owner or the master is the author. So this entire poem is told from the point of view of a writing utensil waiting to be picked up and used by an author. And I know you're like, how am I supposed to get that? Where did you even get that from? This is where we go back and we look at our connotation, okay? Something that can stand in a corner, something that can be resting, that can be picked up and easily taken away. Something that can serve in a partnership and can speak for the master. Think about y'all, a pen, written words speak for their author. They have this lasting power. And this idea here that the mountains, when our pen speaks for the master, the mountains reply, that there is an echo of the written word. Okay, so here we have the past as a pen, what life was like, and then we have the present day, what life is like before the owner, before our pen found purpose, and what life is like after the pen found purpose. We have the idea that the pen is in a corner here, whereas in our next stanza, the pen is roaming the wood. It's hunting the doe. It's going on these grand adventures with our master, with the author. We get into the next stanza, and she says, and I do smile such cordial light. Writing can be beautiful, right? Writing can be polite and kind and really quite lovely. It's like a glowing valley, right? It can illuminate things in front of us. But life or writing can also be Vesuvian. And this is a reference to Mount Vesuvius, the famous volcano that erupted and killed everyone in Pompeii. Writing can also be dangerous, right? So writing has this very duplicitous meaning. It can either be something that illuminates meaning, illuminates the individual, brings joy and happiness, or it can destroy. So we have this kind of idea of duplicity. She then moves into what happens at night. After they've had a good day of writing, she guards my master's head. This idea that the pen is the keeper of the thought, that when the author sleeps, the pen is just waiting there for the next day to be picked up and to be used again. And the idea that once the pen is used, it provides this sense of comfort, right? It provides a sense of peace. The author can sleep once the pen has been used. The pen is happy here. It's happy to be a point of comfort. It's happy to be of a deeper purpose. And the reference here to the deep pillow, the eider duck deep pillow, once upon a time, pillows were made entirely of feathers, and pens were feather, right? You'd have a feather quill. So this is a reference here to the idea of construction. A pillow is made of feathers, a pen is made of feathers. She goes then into this idea, like maybe the next day they wake up or later on after they've had this time of comfort, and she goes to an extreme. To foe of his, I'm deadly foe, right? So anybody who dares step to my master, I'm deadly. I can eviscerate people. And I want you to think about how writing can hurt others, how writing can compromise other people's safety or their reputations. Seeing something inflammatory in the written word is incredibly powerful and effective. And she says that when she turns her attention, this is the speaker, the pen talking, to the master's foe, she's explosive. She can lay a yellow eye. And this is the idea of going back to the gun. When a gun is fired, we have that explosion, that bright, moment of combustion. And she also says she's like an emphatic thumb, and this is the gesture of cocking back a gun, right? So she's saying here that she provides her master with comfort, but she defends him as well. And this is really where we see this analysis of writing as a gun. Writing is something that can be used to protect. It can be used to guard. Writing can be used, though, also to harm or to maim or to kill. That writing can be incredibly dangerous. So then we get into our final stanza where we have our riddle, right? So something is going to live longer, but he's going to live longer than her. So we have this like odd riddle back and forth. So though I than he may longer live, the pen may survive the author, physically, right? But he longer must than I. The pen may survive physically, but the pen has no purpose. It's useless without the master. They need each other. They are dependent upon each other. And this idea of I have the power to kill without the power to die, she's saying here that words can hurt, but they never die, right? This is that idea of like, somebody may say something unkind or ugly to you, and they say it in the moment, and those words kind of float in the atmosphere for a second, and then they disappear, but the pain, the hurt, the emotion can stay forever, right? And I remember the first time I was called a profane word in middle school, and I remember who said it, I remember where I was, and I remember all of the feeling of that, right? The word itself now, okay, whatever, but the emotion of that moment is still incredibly effective. So words can hurt. Words have power. The written word and the pain of the written word is eternal. Okay, so this is how we get to that analysis, that paraphrase, that writing is a gun, that our speaker here is a pen and the master is the author. Now, if we're going to move into connotation, which is the next step of our TP cast, we would look for words that stand out to us. Words that I think are incredibly significant are going to be these over here. And she puts them in contrast, right? And that's why I think they're so incredibly important. She's highlighting the positive and the negative attributes of writing. So night versus day, valley versus mountain, I versus thumb, we versus he, corner versus woods. So everything in this poem is done in duplicate, but contrasting duplicates. Just like the pen and the owner are duplicates, they work together. They are contrasts. One is living and one is not. One depends on they both depend on each other. They require each other, just like the day and the night need each other. Just like the idea of being imprisoned needs the idea of freedom. So these would be words that I would look at for my connotation. Then we're going to move into the idea of shifts, right? We're going to look for places where our poet, we're going to come back to attitude, I just realized I skipped that. We're going to look for places where our poet changes her topic or her conversation. First and foremost, I'd look at the stanzas, right? We have 4-line stanzas, so these are known as quatrains, and each of our quatrains presents a different concept or idea. We go from feeling alone and then finally finding purpose, to the idea of partnership, to the idea of possibly being positive, possibly being dangerous, to the idea of comfort, protection, and then that riddle in the end about the written word, about the lasting effect of the written word. So I would look at how breaking these stanzas, shifting from stanza to stanza, helps create these different points of meaning. These breaks in the stanzas help us gain a deeper understanding of what she's talking about. I would also look at the shift from the single, right, that individual language, to the double, right? So my versus we. What is it to have power as the individual versus to have power in a partnership? Okay, so I would look at that. I would also look for Emily at her hyphens. Where are places she wants us to pause and to think? Where are places that she uses more hyphens? This may indicate to us shifts in her emotion. So I would look to that. Tone or attitude, really, if we're looking at TP Cast, is all about how the speaker sees this content, sees the topic of the poem. Our pen goes through different tonal shifts. So you can talk about tone shifting as well. There's a sense of longing. There is this tone of admiration. There's a tone here of protection. There's a tonal shift then into one of aggression, about the yellow eye and the emphatic thumb. And then the tonal shift in the end to one of almost a gentle teasing or mocking, where it's this idea of like, can you figure out the riddle? Ha ha ha, Can you do it? Do you get it? Are you here with me? So I would look at those tone points and how they shift, and you could bring that into your analysis of shifts. So then, guys, I go back to my title, right? I go back to see if I better understand what she's saying through the title of her poem. And Emily's titles, like I said, are almost always her first line, or they're the number. So my life had stood a loaded gun. Well, she's talking here as a pen. She has that potential for explosion. She has that ability to gather attention, to protect, to be dangerous, or to enable survival, right? If they're out hunting with a gun, that's a survival thing. So she's saying here that as the pen, she has all of these possibilities, all of these reasons for existing. And if we expand that a bit out to beyond the pen and more about the human condition, we're all in many ways like loaded guns, right? We all have these numerous points of potential. We can all be explosive, right? I'm a pretty chill person, but there are times where I lose my patience. We all have the people we long to protect. We have people we are in partnership with. There are people in our lives who we may wish to lay the yellow eye on or the thumb on, that we want to just say something to them. We want to be direct with them and maybe even hurtful with them. That, like the pen here, we as humans have this potential for all kinds of things. Okay, so that's how you can take that title and bring it out a bit to comment on the human condition. So then thematically, things I would look at here would be about how poetry, writing, the written word, has both a destructive power and a constructive power. Writing can destroy and it can rebuild. Writing can protect and it can harm. I would look at that duplicated potential of writing, of poetry. So that would be a theme that I would point to. This, y'all, is about her poetic gunshot, if you will. This is Emily Dickinson pulling the trigger, if you will, on her view of writing, her view of poetry, and her saying that she will die someday, but her poetry will remain. And she did not know, y'all, that she would end up considered one of the ultimate American poets. She didn't know that 150 years later, people would be studying her work. She had no idea, but she did know that those words from her heart, from her head, onto the journal page, there was something eternal about them, about the power of the written word and the necessity of the written word. So this would be an example of how you could use that TPCAST system to work through what I think is an incredibly challenging poem. When we talk about hard poems, this is probably one of the hardest that I can present to you and kind of go through in a fairly quick way. Because, y'all, Emily, I love her. She is, like I said, she's one of my favorites, but she's very, very tough. So that is My Life Had Stood a Loaded Gun.